All right, so this image is by hand, and we're looking at pattern here. And just like we saw with Kayla's image a second ago, this is all about getting closer and filling the frame with your subject. So not having a door jamb on the side of this or not having grass on the top of this, filling the frame with this wall so we don't understand how large it is or the scale of things, right? We don't know if it's really long or if it's just a short section. We have all that open to our minds. It's a mystery to us, and I think that works well. Let's look at your settings really quick here. You're at ISO 200, 24 millimeters, f4 at 1/60th of a second. So all those settings look good. The light here I don't think is the most directional and adding dimension to that. So that would be the one thing I think you could do to improve this image. Watch something like this throughout the day and see how it changes. This image is by Jarrell. You're at ISO 200, 14 millimeters, f8 at 1/100th of a second. Your settings all look good there. Now, if we look at the grass, we can see that it looks kind of washed out. We see the brick looks a little bit washed out, but more so the grass. So while the numbers here look good, your exposure is a little overexposed. You'd want that grass to look a little bit darker, so maybe about half a stop, less exposure would work better here. The light that you're using is pretty flat light. So again, like I just talked about with Hannah's image, just watching this throughout the day to see how the light changes and if it adds more depth and dimension to your subject. But what you've done really well here is you've gotten close to your subject. So you've filled your frame with this brick wall, and then you've added the grass at the bottom. So here we have a sense of a scale. We know how big these bricks are, but we don't know how long this wall is. We can kind of figure that it goes on and on forever. And I think that works well. And also you have some colors that have a contrast to them, not complementary colors, but we know red and green have a strong contrast to them, especially if we're thinking more about pigments instead of light as we talk about in photography. But these colors are working well together to create a pop of color for us. This image is by Alicia. You're at ISO 100, 18 millimeters, f16 at 1/13th of a second. So I can see here on a tripod, we see that tripod leg right there. But I would still adjust this image because shooting this at f16 gives you a lot of depth of field, but your subject is pretty flat here. So instead of f16, you could shoot this at f11, f8, f5.6. That would be 3 stops of light. And then because you've taken that and you've added light to the aperture, you could take light away by having a fast shutter speed. So that would be from 1/13th to 1/25th to 1/50th to 1/100th of a second. Then you wouldn't have to worry about any shaking happening, as we'll see in some of your images. So just adjusting that shutter speed and aperture to make sure that you're setting yourself up to have nice sharp images. But like we saw in the last image, what I think is working really well here is the contrast. So we have our pattern of the ground and we have the pattern of the bricks that have been laid here, right? That pattern is broken up by this grass, and I always think patterns are most interesting when they're getting broken up. And then we can compare this harshness, it's kind of juxtaposed with the grass in the background. So that comparison works well here to fill out your image. This image is by Megan. Let's look at those settings again. You're at ISO 100, 31 millimeters, pretty wide angle, f14 at 1/60th of a second. So here you have a bit of a smaller aperture, but you're at a fast enough shutter speed that if you wanted to handhold, you could. This is one of those images that just lets me know that you're looking around and you're looking at things differently. So probably last September, let's say, if you were to walk past this, you would just walk past it. You wouldn't see the pattern. You wouldn't see the texture that's happening. You have the texture of the wall and the pattern of the shadow over the top of it, right? So this layering of patterns is so beautiful here. I think this image could work the way that you shot it, with the edge all the way around with trees. Or you could get close and just have it more of an abstracted image of the shadows on the wall. I think both are successful images. So this is another one of those that's working really well to show how you've grown and how you're seeing things. And then this is the last image that we'll look at for this part of this series, looking at shape. And this is by looking at pattern. This is by Ayana. And we have a brick wall, or a cement wall in the background with some bricks as windows. And we have this layering effect where you're shooting through a chain link fence. And it's not obvious at first, right? We kind of move through it without even noticing it as we look into the background. But then as we kind of refocus our eyes, we can see that fence, and it adds this nice plasticity to the image. And this could really work either way. This could be very distracting if that fence was too in focus. It could pull our attention away from the fence that you want us to look at, the wall that you want us to look at, by only being able to focus on the fence. But here it's adding this kind of element that we can't get through it, and we're trying to figure out what's going on behind it. It also has this like beautiful glistening, it almost looks golden here, that's working really well. Let's look at your settings really quick. ISO 100, 160 millimeters, so a really long lens, f5.6 at 1/250th of a second. So all those settings look good.